On March 7th, 1965, a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement unfolded in Selma, Alabama, as John Lewis and Hosea Williams led a peaceful march of about 600 people across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The march aimed to demand voting rights for Black Americans who were systemically disenfranchised through discriminatory practices like tests, poll taxes, and intimidation. This specific march was also a response to the recent killing of Jimmy Lee Jackson, a young black activist fatally shot by a state trooper during a peaceful protest in Marion, Alabama. The marchers began their journey from Selma, intending to walk 54 miles to Montgomery to petition Governor George Wallace to protect black citizens' voting rights. As the group crossed the bridge, they were confronted by a wall of Alabama state troopers and local law enforcement. Sheriff Jim Clark and Major John Cloud had mobilized their forces armed with batons, tear gas, and whips. The officers ordered the marchers to disperse, but when they refused to turn back, the troopers advanced. What followed was a shocking and brutal assault. Officers attacked the unarmed protesters, striking them with clubs, whipping them, and firing tear gas. Marchers fled in panic. Many were trampled in the chaos. John Lewis, then a 25-year-old leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was severely beaten, suffered a fractured skull, and dozens of other marchers were injured, some so gravely that they required hospitalization. And this came to be known as Bloody Sunday. So I just thought that was, um, speaking of things that you can't happen if you are purely invested in the digital world, uh, civil disobedience is something that can't really have the same impact in a place like the metaverse because the physical consequence of being disobedient is, you log off or you take your goggles off or someone sends a mean tweet at you. John Lewis was experiencing actual physical consequences fighting for civil rights.
Yeah. And it's lost on so many people how young these activists were, like
25,
25.
crazy.
And he was in the game for at that point for 6 years, and he was 25. And yeah, MLK, like, died at 39. Like, Malcolm X died at 39. Like, these people didn't even make it past 40. Um, yeah, that see, just think about a 25-year-old being able to endure that now, it doesn't even seem possible. And to be, have that restraint of civil disobedience. And even now, people still seeing the civil disobedience in the civil rights movement as soft. Like, if
Mm.
that was me, I would've whatever. I mean, because anyone can fight. But I believe this, and I mentioned in that piece, but I believe this happened after John Lewis was beat in another
Yeah. Yeah,
protest.
there's something else I remember reading that
Yeah.
led up to this.
So, this was he wasn't 25, I think he was 20, 21. But a man, and this was, a bus boycott, I believe in Richmond, Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and long story short, there's a protest there, and John Lewis gets beat by a group of young Ku Klux Klanmen that weren't in their garb, but they were a part of the group. And he had a choice on whether or not, and why this was a choice and these men just weren't arrested, but a police officer asked John if he wanted to have them arrested, and he said no. One of them heard him in earshot, and John didn't know he heard him. 50 years later, 60 years later, 2009, this is a year after Obama's elected president, Congressman John Lewis is in his office, and a white man walks in with his son, and it was that white man that was one of the men that beat him that day. And
Wow.
he said he was sobbing and crying and asked John to forgive him. And John first was like, "Who are you?" And he explained who he was. And he said, "This is my son. My son, I told my son about this years ago." And his son obviously, didn't grow up the way, they didn't have the same journey his father had. It was probably telling him that he needs to ask for forgiveness. But long story short, they became friends. Both are deceased now. But and both has still had political conflicting views. That man was a Republican, didn't vote for Obama. Um, But that man did say, when I heard you give that grace to me where I wasn't gonna be arrested after I just left you in your own pool of blood.
Yeah.
After that, that haunted me, and then he said he went back to God. He said, "God, I asked for God for forgiveness," and then since I was, um my faith grew and I was with, back in line with Jesus Christ. Um, and then that gave him that confidence to go to John and that need to go to John and ask for him for forgiveness in person. And then John said they both were crying and reconciled. And John said, this is the whole point of the civil rights movement. It doesn't end. Like this type of tenacity and audacity to keep loving people that hate you does not end.